Welcome to New Stripe City, a YouTube channel for diehard Bengals fans. I'm your host, Ace Boogie, and I had to bring on two of my special guests today. Number one is the man, the myth. You already know the legend, Zim from IG. And we also have my boy Rob Bomber. For you guys that have checked out Zim's live, you already know he's one of the most popular guys on IG. He's one
Appreciate
of my
that.
favorites, at least, definitely. I feel like a lot of Who They Nation already knows about him. I love his energy. Rob, he's very informative. You guys have seen him on Zim Show. This guy knows what he's talking about. So I had to bring two of my fellow guys from Who They Nation in. And today we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about coaching changes. We're going to talk about coordinator changes, possible changes going forward with the new coach, Zac Taylor. So I'll open it up with that. We'll talk about Zac Taylor. Zim, what were your thoughts on us bringing in Zac Taylor? And after you go, we can bring in Rob.
Well, originally, I think we were really looking for Eric Bieniemy because that was the hot name at the time. Um, I mean, like for a month or so, I was calling Eric Bieniemy, Eric Bieniemy. I didn't know that would be like such a hot choice at the time, but I mean, it made sense. But as I move forward and I get more information, I think Bengals are looking way more long term, and the people that are around the organization are saying pretty much if they would have waited a year or two, Zac Taylor would have been like one of the number one, number two candidates out here, and they would have never had a shot at him. So, like, the meaning behind it was more so like long term. They're looking for Zac Taylor to be like the guy that's there 10, 12 years, pretty much emulating the Steelers. As much as we hate the Steelers, like it's like the Tomlin Coward thing, they got both of them really young at 34, and then they just been there for a long time. They haven't had that many coaches there. So, I mean, I get it. It's all going to be about the staff that he puts around him. So that's going to be super important. The report that we got, and I know we're going to get into that a little bit later, is like Jack Del Rio's possibly the defensive coordinator. Callahan is going to be the offensive line coach. So it seems as though he's putting some guys that are stable in this league around him. And so if he can do that, hey, I'm good to go.
Yeah, and I feel exactly the same way. Initially, my guy for the new head coach was Darren Simmons, our special teams coordinator. I'm a huge fan of special teams coaches. I think they understand both sides of the ball a little bit better than an offensive mind or a defensive mind, and then that balance can really go ahead and bring a team up. And I think a good example of that is Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick was a special teams coordinator, and we see how smart he is. We see, the things he's able to go ahead and do in New England. But like Zim was saying, it's really going to go ahead and depend on the supporting staff that Zac brings in, because we have a team of a bunch of guys who are, tired of losing. And we also have younger guys who are not used to losing and want to win. We got guys like Joe Mixon, who has voiced his frustration with the organization letting go of Frank Pollock, our offensive line coach. And so that's going to be really interesting in terms of how do you replace that level of respect in the organization? How do you replace that level of consistency? Because we can see that our offensive line has gotten a really big chunk better than it did last season behind Frank Pollock. And I think that Marvin kind of staggered and put a lot of players in positions where they weren't necessarily playing to their strengths. So Zac Taylor, as a young guy, I think is going to give other young guys opportunities. So we're really going to get to establish how much depth we have in certain positions. But the big thing is going to be the chemistry. How is this young coach going to demand the respect of that locker room, not only offensively, but how is he going to go ahead and get defensive guys to go ahead and respect him? Guys that have been there like Geno Atkins, guys that have been there like Carlos Dunlap, and even guys like Drake or Patrick. How's that contract going to be reworked? How are we going to be able to, really make all those pieces fit? But it's an interesting situation, and he has my support.
Yeah, I was totally shocked. I think Zim was the first person to put me on Eric Bieniemy, and I immediately saw exactly where he was coming from. And then when I dug deeper and saw that he was a former Bengal, it was just like, initially,
Yeah, that should be a
like Zim
slam
said,
dunk.
it was like a slam dunk, especially with the Chiefs putting up historic numbers this year with Pat Mahomes and being able to utilize all of those weapons. And I told a couple of my friends we had, in my opinion, a similar roster, talent wise and skill set wise, as the Chiefs have. Like, you have Travis Kelce over there. We have Tyler Eifert. You know, you have Sammy Watkins, your bigger receiver that can be a deep threat. We have AJ Green. They have Tyreek Hill. We have John Ross. You know, we have Tyler Boyd. He's way better than Chris Conley. You know, they had at one point Kareem Hunt. We have Joe Mixon. It just, to me, seemed like it was a sure thing, and I kind of started getting excited. And I kept mentioning that Zac Taylor was still out there, but I didn't think that he would be a front runner over a guy like Bieniemy, who I felt like would have had a previous relationship with Mike Brown. So initially, when it first happened, I was like, man, I was kind of bummed, to be honest with you, because it was like Bieniemy was the guy. But then, like, when I started to think more about the Zac Taylor thing, I was like, okay, well, they're giving our fan base exactly what we asked for, which is the complete opposite of Marvin Lewis, which I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then, like, when he started making like, certain reports were coming out saying that he wanted Bevel as the OC and he wanted to bring in his defensive coordinator. And the fact that he kept some of the best coaches initially, I was like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. But when we lost Frank Pollock, I was like, man, I'm not even gonna lie, I was
And
kind of
see,
salty at
that's
that point.
exactly where I'm at. I'm in that team. I'm like, okay, we're making the right move. And then that Frank Pollock thing is the only thing that I'm kind of like, I don't know exactly how that's going to go ahead and play out.
But to be
How,
honest with you, Zim had posted this, like, if they can bring in Bill Callahan, which was the guy that essentially superseded Pollock in Dallas, who was really the guy that was responsible for that line. A lot of people actually gave him most of the credit. I think that it could end up being a possible upgrade, but that is left up to Jay Gruden and the Washington Redskins if he's going to block that or not. So
yeah,
with that, Zim, what do you think of? I see that you want to say something. What do you think of the coordinators that he could be bringing in, or some of the changes that Taylor could be making?
Say with the Frank Pollock thing, I would be interested in know, is it a blocking scheme that didn't get fired? He left. So I want to know, is it a blocking scheme thing that wasn't into, or was it something where Frank Pollock was actually thinking later on down the line he would have a better role, or possibly like a can? And obviously, if Zac Taylor's putting his people in place, he'll never be the head coach. I think that's why somebody's staying there, or currently right now, we don't know. But currently right now, he's still there because he maybe doesn't have the same aspirations of a Frank Pollock going and taking it to the next level for a head coach. Although around the stadium that he definitely wanted to be a head coach. So the Frank Pollock thing, I'm thinking about it. Some of the zone blocking for, I think Zac Taylor is going to try to mesh that with this. And it's all about spacing. When y'all watch the Rams game coming up later on in the day, and I think Frank Pollock is one that are so traditional style. It's just pretty much like just wheel your man out the way. That's why a guy like Westerman did really well for him, but didn't do good for a guy before them.
Okay, that makes
Paul
sense.
Alexander,
like, because Paul Alexander, he was teaching a catch. You catch a guy, then you let him. You take that force, and then you block off of that. Where Frank Pollock is right off the line of scrimmage. So I'm interested to see like what was the reason behind that. As far as the coordinators, Jack Del Rio doesn't make me go crazy. On my end, I struggle with it. I'm always seeing them talking about, okay, we got this young coach and young mind. I want to see if you're just putting all these old guys, and not old, I don't mean like old in age, but like old in thought processes around him. Influence him so much so that it doesn't really allow him to be like what I think we're signing up for. So,
I see what you're saying.
The other train of thought is like the Sean McVay thing. So have like, stalwarts on the coordinator side, make sure that you're young stuff that can teach you about the mistakes that they've made. But you know, I don't know. I need to see the staff, man. I hear a bunch of rumors and stuff like that. Comment on some of the guys that I've heard, because for like a week, Bevel was supposed to be the offensive coordinator, so we don't know.
And I feel that. I feel like Zim, I think the biggest thing you hit on is if we're going to go ahead and get this guy as staff, we can't surround him with a bunch of traditionalists, because football is not played traditionally anymore. And so with that being said, you can't say, oh, I want this young offensive mind, I'm just going to influence him with a whole bunch of traditional ways. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and be signing up for last in the division, because you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to be able to go ahead and decide the identity of your team, which is something I've been saying for a while. And I think this team has just lacked its identity. Are we going to get back to being a defensive powerhouse and a top 10 defense in the league, or are we going to get back to being an offensive powerhouse? When you look at the years that the Bengals made it to the Super Bowl, it was definitely the offense that brought us there. We had pretty solid defense, and we did have good defensive players. But the years that we made it to the Super Bowl were because we had quarterbacks that were playmakers, and we had coaches that let those players play and be innovative in how they were. The Bengals had crazy deep pass attacks. They had their play action was astounding. Like, they had a whole lot of, different tools in that toolbox. And right now, as a team, we have to figure out what set of tools we need, or, what type of toolbox we want to open. Also, though, I'm a little concerned because I like Zac Taylor, but I feel like a lot of teams are trying to go ahead and look at that Sean McVay coaching tree with the best intentions, like, oh, maybe these young guys are going to be, Sean McVay 2.0s. And I think that there's only one Sean McVay, and I think he's a really big outlier in young guys that know the game as well as he does. But I feel like if Zac Taylor could do his homework and he could really build a chemistry with this team, I think we're in great hands.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the Zac Taylor thing, that was the only negative to me, because it's a copycat league, and I think the fact that you saw like anybody that basically brushed shoulders with this dude, Sean McVay, basically got any kind of interview or opportunity was just kind of ridiculous. But what I'm hoping is, from what I've heard, like, and it seems like they've had like articles on him and his brother, maybe like Zim said, they're trying to get a few years ahead of the curve and try to grab this guy before he becomes the next best offensive coordinator. But I totally agree with you guys on that. Now, the thing is that Zim hit on too is maybe it was that Frank Pollock asked for his release because it wasn't kind of a scheme fit. I mean, maybe what they were trying to do was in a sense different from what he wanted to do. And I think it's also a copycat league, because I feel like the reason that they're going after, like Zim said, Del Rio with the older mind, is you're seeing a lot of these younger offensive coordinators go after old defensive coordinators that have a wealth of knowledge in terms of defense. Now, I reached out to one of my friends that's a Jacksonville Jaguars fan about Del Rio to ask him, what his thoughts were about him. And he said that he is a hell of a defensive mind, but as a head coach, he just wasn't good. So it sounded like it was almost kind of like the Hugh Jackson effect just on the defensive side of the ball, where he's a hell of a defensive coordinator, but as a head coach, he might not be the right guy. He had said when Del Rio was there with Jacksonville that their defense was pretty good. And I think someone said that the Raiders defense was decent, and then Del Rio left and it kind of basically fell apart. But I feel like I remember it being trash at least 1 year under Del Rio. So we'll have to see. But honestly, given the names that were out there at this point, because it was like with us waiting so long, waiting on Zac Taylor, a lot of guys started taking other jobs. I don't know if that's the same situation that happened with Bevel, where it was like, let me take this job because it's not, a promise or a sure thing. I was really wondering and kind of getting worried about the defensive side of the ball, because you saw guys like I think Wilkes from Arizona that ended up getting signed by Cleveland. Like, Greg Williams got signed by the Jets. And I was like, are we going to – I mean, obviously they wouldn't do this, but I was like, are they going to have to consider somebody like Marvin Lewis for defensive coordinator? Because, like, there's nobody out there. So I think Del Rio probably makes sense just because he took like a year off. And he's probably, like, from an experience standpoint, the best that you can get versus an unknown, which we kind of saw well, not necessarily an unknown with Terrell Austin, but seeing what happened with Terrell Austin, I think last year kind of scared them into trying to get somebody that's a more known commodity on the defensive side versus taking a risk on the offensive side like they did with Zac Taylor. Now to follow that up, which players, because I've always said when you bring in a new coach, anybody has potential to be moved. Anything can happen. Like coaches like to bring in their guys. In my opinion, I think guys that might have their job on the line might be Vontaze Burfict, Drake Kirkpatrick, Andy Dalton. Those are a few names that just come to mind. What do you guys think will be some of the new strategy going forward? Obviously, we pretty much got rid of our entire coaching staff. What players do you see either staying or going, and what can we do with some of those players? Do we trade them? Do we release them? Zim, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, for the most part, I don't know. Have y'all been seeing this rumors about Andy Dalton getting traded to the Redskins?
Yeah, I have seen that.
I've seen that.
I keep going right, but I wrote article after article, things that I've written before that said, like Cash is not a good quarterback draft. Like the more and more I look at these quarterbacks, this is the time to cash out. He's a 3-time Pro Bowler. He doesn't ever have a major injury on his record, like ever. You know what I'm saying? He has no torn ACL, nothing like that. He's in the prime of his career, and that's on the brink of success, or that's desperate, like the Redskins, the Jaguars, somebody like that. That's an ideal fit if you don't want to take your time on a project with these guys and coaches getting the coach time. So they don't have time to wait on prospects or quarterbacks. You have to feast on that, and that guy is absolutely worth a first-round pick to me. If A.J. McCarron got a third and a second, there's no way Dalton couldn't get a first. If Dalton played for the Cowboys right now instead of Dak, I like that team better with Dalton. And I'm not a Dalton fan.
That makes sense.
But you know what I mean? But like for me, it's just the stability that he brings to an organization. And the main thing that I always hit on is that your availability is the only thing that can really, really show your true value. And that's something he's always been. These thumb injuries, he's had a couple of these years, but like I said, no major injury. Aside from that, Vontaze Burfict, if he comes to OTAs and he's out of shape, they got to let him go. The one of the main priorities that we're going to be looking at in the offseason is going to be, what do they do with Darqueze Dennard? Do they sign him again? Yes. Also, with the 3 tight ends, I don't want to go to the draft with tight ends, even though you could, but we already have the ability with guys already in our system with C.J. Uzomah, Tyler Kroft, Tyler Eifert, and Mason Schreck, who is still in the contract. So if they were to just re-sign those tight ends at bargain numbers, I think they'd be okay. But I think a lot of teams in the division, especially like the Ravens or somebody like that, they will absolutely be looking at our tight end free agents. So that's something to really, really check out for. I was listening to the Cincinnati Enquirer. This is one that they said it probably wouldn't happen, but they stand to gain a lot of money if they did walk away from the Bowling contract and the Gio Bernard contract. You know how they just moved away from the Reggie Nelson one, like what was that, mid-season or before the season even started? Bowling and Gio Bernard are ones that they absolutely could garner back some money for. And personally, me, Gio Bernard, I like to see him get a shot somewhere where he actually is utilized correctly. If they feel as though they could do that here, then so be it. But we didn't draft Mark Walton that early to just have him sit there and, do nothing. So those are some guys I think I already been starting to look at different free agents I like. But as far as like moving guys and stuff like that, Darqueze Dennard's got to be number 1 on the list. And then after that, we're going into the tight ends.
Right, I totally agree. I think one of the big ones that I'm keeping my eye on, like you said, was Tyler Eifert. I know they had interviewed him before any of the reports came out, and he said that his decision on returning would kind of depend on which direction we went with the head coach. So I think that's definitely one that's interesting. The reason why I feel like Vontaze Burfict or possibly Dre could be on the move is just because Marvin Lewis, in terms of Vontaze, was like a father figure to him. Like he dealt with a lot of stuff that Vontaze did. And I don't know if this new coach wants to move away from Vontaze just because of the stigma or the distraction that surrounds him. Because to me, sometimes I feel like the perception of Vontaze Burfict is overblown. And I feel like our fans sometimes were hard on him, but I think a lot of us put up with a lot of his stuff. And like I almost have to, whenever I'm talking to somebody outside of Who Dey Nation, I always have to explain to them that he's actually a good player. They're like, they really don't think Vontaze Burfict is a good linebacker. They really think that he's just a dirty player that isn't. And like, to me, like not going off of last year, because obviously last year was a down year, but when you look at his best years, he was like a top 5, top 3 linebacker in the league. And it's like, the story is so put out there, and I get so mad when I'm like talking to these guys because they'll see Vontaze do something and they'll be like, "Oh, he's dirty. He's super dirty. Like he's not even good. He can't do anything without doing this." So I don't know if me personally, I would keep Vontaze, but I don't know if a new coach that's coming in is going to want to deal with that perception that he has around the league. And it's not only just with the media, it's also with some players too around the league that don't like him. Most notably the Steelers. It's like every time we play the Steelers, it's always it just pisses me off because you hear them always say something about Vontaze Burfict after the game, no matter what. So I think that could threaten him. With Dre Kirkpatrick, I feel like that contract that we signed him to, and if this, I don't know how familiar Zac Taylor might be with Darqueze Dennard, but if he is, you know, looking at analytics and looking at Pro Football Focus, it won't take him but 5 minutes to figure out that Darqueze Dennard probably has better potential as a starter than Dre Kirkpatrick. And with that being said, like, because we're paying him $50 million, $10 million a year average salary, I feel like that makes him a candidate to possibly get released. Because Zim talked about George Iloka, how they walked away from that contract. Well, this was what we're going on year 3 of the Dre Kirkpatrick contract. Will they bring him back? Will they not? I'm not sure. I think it's cool if Dre stays, but I still think that they will consider that at the end of the day. Rob, what are your thoughts?
I think I'm gonna just to go ahead and piggyback on what you're saying real fast. I'm gonna go ahead and talk about Dre before I talk about the players I think they're gonna get let go. I feel like they're gonna fix Dre's contract because I think as far as cornerback depth in the league right now, I don't think that you could really look at the draft for that outside of maybe what Greedy Williams, and it's like even then that's like I think people are a little high on him, and I don't think that that's a source of legitimate talent back there. I think our secondary, although it's not the best in the league, it was definitely not in the bottom half as far as the secondary is concerned. Our linebackers definitely, I mean, we got to address that, but I think that they're actually going to rework Dre's contract, and I think we're going to see him back in Cincinnati again. I think the smart thing to do would definitely be, if we came down to it between Dennard and Dre Kirkpatrick, definitely taking Dennard because we need a tackler on the secondary as well. And every time, as much as I like Dre Kirkpatrick, every time I see highlight plays against the Bengals, Dre Kirkpatrick is getting stiff arm down the field. Dre Kirkpatrick is, all over the place, and he's not somebody that consistently can wrap somebody up like that. But as far as coverage, I think he's good. Players that I think are definitely going to be let go. Number one, obviously, is Vontaze. I think that there's just not enough. As talented as he is, I don't think there's enough positive connotation surrounding him right now that our team is going to go ahead and keep him. And I think that, I don't think it's going to go ahead and be worth it in that aspect. I think the other guy that we're probably going to go ahead and let go of is Gio, because I think Gio's contract is going to be advantageous just to let him go. That is going to go ahead and give us a little bit of money. We don't use him as much as we should. And if we're not going to go ahead and use him in the backfield and mix things up like that as far as our offense is concerned, then he's much more of a liability than he is an asset to the team. As much as I like Gio Bernard too, because he's fast, he's smart, he's an uptight guy. You never hear about him being in any trouble or nothing like that. I like that about him. But that's going to be crazy. And, as sad as I'm going to say this as well, I think Auden Tate is going to be one of them players who might have to hit the free agency this year, which I think is a terrible move because I don't think that this team has allowed him to really showcase what he can do. And I really want to go ahead and see that happen. So hopefully our new coach can see the potential in him and advocate for him to stay on this roster because he needs it. But if that's the case, we got to get rid of Core. I don't think Core has been productive enough. I don't think Malone has been productive enough. Even though Malone had that very lucky touchdown his rookie season, I think that Tate has the potential to be extremely more effective in our passing game than either of those receivers. And in the event that we do bring back Eifert and God forbid he gets hurt again, we need a red zone threat, and Auden Tate can be that guy.
Right. I think you hit on a lot of things. Also, I forgot to bring up what Zim brought up with Pollock. I mean, not Pollock, but Bowling. That was another one that I think I can agree with too, especially with the line changing over. They could use that as someone who could get replaced, especially with how Westerman played last year. That's definitely, I think, a possibility. And then as you hit it on Auden Tate, I think that's another guy that could be possibly gone. The interesting thing is Zac Taylor has spent some time and has had some experience with actually being a wide receiver coach. So we could see a lot of changes, at least on the back end of that wide receiver room as well. I think, like you said, Cody Core, there's no way that Zac Taylor can keep Cody Core. I mean, I don't know. I really don't understand how he made the team last year. Auden Tate, depending on, and I think Zim has spoken with some people about Auden Tate. Some of them feel that he's kind of raw in some areas. I'm not sure if that will be detrimental or not. But I'm going to throw a big one out here, and I know that this is going to get the chat room in an uproar. But I'm going to say one guy that I think, and I'm not saying that it's going to be a far-going conclusion, but one guy who at least will have, I'd probably say, a 30% chance. Well, I think there's a 30% chance that we could move on from him is Andy Dalton. And the reason that I say that is whenever you get a new coach in the NFL and they come in, they always want to get our guy. We saw it with Kansas City with Andy Reid. He came in and got his guy. We've seen this in other areas. Mike Zimmer comes in. He ends up getting his guy. It didn't work out, but they end up getting their guys. We look at Jim Harbaugh. He came in, replaced Alex Smith again, got Colin Kaepernick. This might not be, and the reason that I'm putting it at 30% is just because, as Zim noted earlier, this isn't the best quarterback class to just go and get your guy immediately.
Exactly. And I think that's the big thing, is that's going to really affect everything. Whether or not we draft a quarterback in the first round is really going to go ahead and let us know the direction of the team. And I think a lot of those question marks we have on our roster are going to be answered come draft day, because our first round pick is going to let everybody in Houday Nation know where our mind is at as far as the future of this team. Let's say we go out there and miraculously, we get Haskins, right? Ohio fans are going to be ecstatic. Everybody's going to be really excited. And it's obviously going to lean towards a more pass-heavy team. Let's say we go out and get Kyler Murray. I think we're going to go ahead and get more of a play-action, more run-oriented team. But Andy Dalton's job, I think, is dependent on whether or not we get that talent in that draft. And if we do, I think for his contract, there's a lot of talk about maybe replacing him with Ryan Tannehill, just because Tannehill has had similar stats throughout his career. And Zac Taylor has worked with Tannehill before. There's a chemistry there, and we might be able to get him for a whole lot less than what we're paying Dalton right now, which is really pennies compared to a lot of other quarterback contracts. I mean, if you look at Dalton's contract compared to someone like Matt Ryan's contract, essentially Matt Ryan and Dalton, I mean, if you look, Matt Ryan gets elevated because he has Julio and he has a high-powered Falcons offense. His line protects him pretty well. But if you were to put Matt Ryan in Cincinnati, I feel like you'd get a lot of the same
results, for sure.
Results. I couldn't say for sure better or worse, but I'd say they'd be at least consistent.
Let me say a couple things right now, too. Our line, absolutely, left tackle, left guard, Clint Bowling, Billy Price center, right guard, Westerman, right tackle, go get a free agent, right? All right, so that I was just saying the Clint Bowling thing with the contract. I was just saying that because there is a lot of dead money that they wouldn't have to eat with his contract into the Cincinnati Enquirer.
Right.
Year. So like Rob was saying, he has to either get restructured, but all of the money that they could opt out of is the 2020. So if he doesn't restructure a contract, they're not going to move him or anything. I guarantee you that. With that, I think you were just saying too. God, I'm sorry, I forgot because I was kind of like trying to like wait to you. The Andy Dalton situation. Oh, I know one thing you just said too. The one thing that separates Andy Dalton from playoff wins.
That's true.
So I know you're talking about numbers and stats. Same thing, Tannehill, stuff like that. Like when you win playoff games and then you go to a Super Bowl, it just changes the conversation. And if you go look at Andy Dalton and his playoff career, so it's just a totally different conversation. You know, like Nick Foles is not, to me, a better quarterback than Matt Ryan, but he's pretty, you know, he won a Super Bowl. So then that right there just changes the conversation. Like when people tell me that too about Nick Foles and Andy Dalton, they be like, man, I want Nick Foles. I'm like, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but there's a lot of people that say like, nah, man, Nick Foles is terrible during the regular season because during the playoffs, he's way better than the guy that we got right now. You know what I'm saying?
You
So
get to the playoffs
if
first.
you're talking about, then what are we talking about?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think really the big thing and why I kind of drew that comparison is you see a lot of missed opportunities from Andy Dalton, especially downfield, or you see a lot of open space that he doesn't go ahead and convert on, or wide open receivers that he doesn't see. A lot of little nuances like that really shift the momentum of the game. And when you look at why the Falcons were not successful this season, I think a lot of those things have also been reminiscent with Matt Ryan. I mean, there were times where Matt Ryan was, you know, second and goal on the 2 with like a wide open shot to go into the end zone. And he's like, okay, I'm not going to run that. I'm still going to try to gun through my progressions. And sometimes you just have to slow the game down and like recognize those nuances a little bit more if you want to get past that tier into the elite quarterback. And I think that's things that like Drew Brees does well. I think that's things that Nick Foles does well in the playoffs. I think that's things that even guys like Cam Newton does well. He knows when to shift things around and be shady. And that's something that Mahomes has done really well this season. So that's all I was bringing that comparison for. It's just those little small things that we could correct that aren't really coaching. It's just, damn, Matt, like get it in there, bro. Like you can do it.
Right. And I mean, I just feel like, to be honest with you, and I kind of said this last year to one of my group chat Bengals places, was it depends on like I felt like the best chance of a recipe of Andy Dalton even having an inkling of being replaced would be, number one, Marvin Lewis would have to be gone because he was a Dalton guy. Number two, it would have to be a brand new coach that comes in that wants to go out and get his guy. And number three, I think like a lot of people think that Mike Brown wants to keep Andy Dalton around for the contract, which I think that's, you know, part of it. But I think a lot of people forget that this is the same guy that wanted Carson Palmer. This is the same guy that wanted Colin Kaepernick. This is the same guy that wanted to even bring in Michael Vick when Michael Vick first returned to the league. He is a huge quarterback guy. Like, he's a fan of athletic quarterbacks. He's a fan of big arm quarterbacks. Like, it's hard for Mike Brown to like stand by and accept Andy Dalton. Like, he had to get talked into drafting Andy Dalton by Jay Gruden and Marvin Lewis in the 2011 draft. That was not his first option. So to me, I think that those things equal a recipe where you at least entertain the thought of moving on from Dalton. Now, let's say, for instance, they get offered a 4th round pick for Dalton. Obviously, they're not taking that. But if Zim says, Jay Gruden calls us and says, hey, it looks like Alex Smith's career is over and we need a guy that I'm familiar with, a guy that I've banged on the table for during the draft room, and I have that connection with Mike Brown, and he's saying, here's a 1st round draft pick, I think that they consider it, especially if you can bring in a guy like Tannehill. Let's say, for instance, hypothetically, they sign Tannehill for a low dollar amount, and in the draft, something crazy happens and a guy like Kyler Murray is there. I mean, they would almost be like, I feel like if you get that 1st round draft pick and you're able to get a guy like Kyler Murray, why not do that? That's the only reason I feel like they might entertain it. Now, if they don't do that, I think that if he doesn't get traded this year, or if we don't go to the playoffs and win a playoff game with him this year, I think next year is the time that you see him possibly get traded, because that's the last year that we have him. So do you want to be in a situation that you just were in with AJ McCarron, where you just have an asset like Andy Dalton, like Zim has said, where you can cash in on him? Or do you just keep him in 2020, and if you don't make the playoffs, you let him walk away, and then you're in the same situation again? What do you think from that perspective?
I think that it's a little bit different.
And then use him as to bridge to the next one.
I'm sorry, say that again, Zim. It was breaking up a little bit.
Like you're saying, like if we got Tannehill and then draft a quarterback and then use Tannehill essentially to be a bridge quarterback.
To me, the only reason I would want to do that is if we were able to trade Andy Dalton. Like, I wouldn't want to have 3 quarterbacks. If it was like, all right, somebody's offering you,
be able to afford that.
You said we wouldn't be able to afford that.
Afford Tannehill, Dalton, and yeah, I mean that's the only scenario I can tell is like if you go draft a quarterback this year or the next year, that absolutely is the next quarterback of the future, and you're just using Tannehill as a bridge. You need to cash out on Dalton now. I wouldn't be opposed to that.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, so you would cash out on Dalton with the draft picks, and then you would make Tannehill your bridge quarterback. Then you would draft somebody like a Kyler Murray or, whoever it is. And it could be a situation kind of like with Cleveland where they had Tyrod. Tyrod didn't work out, and they were starting Baker Mayfield, midway through the season. That could be the same kind of situation with like a Kyler Murray. So I would use Tannehill as a bridge quarterback. Tannehill definitely isn't the answer at all.
Yeah, Tannehill is definitely not going to be the guy that brings us to Lombardi Trophy, right?
No.
I think we'll know that. But I think for a level of comfort, and I think this is where the Bengals have really been at for a long time, is they say, hey, what moves can we make so we may not necessarily be getting better, but we can guarantee that it won't get any worse. And I think that signing Tannehill would be a move kind
worse.
Of that
Definitely will be in the worst area. I think so. That's interesting too. The fact that they decided to hire a quarterback coach could mean that that's a vote of confidence for Andy Dalton, right? Because this is a guy that's been like a quarterback whisperer in a sense with Tannehill and now with Jared Goff. So I don't know what they're thinking in terms of the quarterback position. I don't know if he's going to come in and want to get his own guy, if he thinks that he can work wonders with Andy Dalton, or what it's going to be. But I think that he's one of the guys to keep an eye on.
Oh yeah, definitely.
For sure.
One comparison you did bring, though, you said like AJ McCarron, and I think there's a little bit of a difference there just because AJ McCarron was a backup. Although he did have starting potential, and although he did go ahead and pretty much win us that playoff game that we ultimately lost against Pittsburgh, I think the separation of the Bengals really wanted to go and not really shop his potential at all. Even when they traded with the Browns, the more I look into that situation, the more I feel like it was on the Bengals side that paperwork didn't get done, because I feel as if there was a situation. I feel like there was a situation in which AJ just wanted to go ahead and showcase his potential, and Cincinnati knew he was the most valuable backup quarterback probably in the AFC. So they said, we're going to try to do all we can to keep you here, and he didn't want to stay. And I think that they hyped his head up when they said they were going to trade him to Cleveland. I think they dropped the ball on that. I think Cincinnati did that on purpose.
Yeah, I just was upset about the AJ McCarron thing, because it was like, you had multiple years to trade this guy. Like, even after 2015, like, I feel like that's when his stock was the highest. But it's like, to drop the ball on that and only get like a 5th round pick after it's all said and done was just like, man, like, who was in charge of making that decision? Like, it was just kind of wild. So I just hope that we don't do, like, if they decide that Andy Dalton isn't the guy, I hope that same situation doesn't happen where we don't capitalize on it like we did with Carson Palmer, where we got those 2 first-round picks to get guys that came in and, they might not have had the biggest impact. And I think those were Giovanni Bernard, and if I'm not mistaken, I think the other one was Drake Kirkpatrick. When we got that first and second rounder, those are guys that can come in and contribute. So that's the only thing I'm hoping for. But I mean, it could be a situation where Andy is here to stay. So with that being said, what do you guys think about the draft? Like which direction? Obviously it's super early right now, but what direction or what position do you think they should hold above others? Zim, I'll start with you.
For me, it's always going to be quarterback. There's going to be 3 or 4 quarterbacks that are going to go in probably in that top 15, 20 range. It's just about who falls. And if they don't feel like Daniel Jones or something like that, then, don't make the pick to force the pick. So they drafted Andy Dalton in the 2nd round. It's very possible when I look Greer and guys that have really, really good – he can help, actually. But that I wouldn't think away from that. So I think a lot of the fan base would be like, damn, you didn't get – and if you did that, you had to go linebacker. And if you don't go linebacker and y'all try to score something like that and another prospect, that just isn't going to fly. I don't know if anyone's watching this and you're familiar with me, I would price fan because of the amount of talent for him at the center position. And I felt like at the time it seemed like a safe pick, but there is no safe pick in the NFL. These are – so there's nothing guaranteed. And you saw that from Billy Price's first year. And I feel like Kyler Murray brings something to the table. I hate when people compare him to Lamar Jackson just because I guess, I don't know, he's faster than a pocket quarterback. But if you look at the league, most of these plays are getting made outside of it. I'm not saying scrambling, not Mike Vick, but guys are extending plays out and throwing outside the pocket like Patrick Mahomes. And Kyler Murray represents that. And Zac Taylor, one thing about him is he's going to bring a lot of that college aspect of getting your players in space, mix a West Coast scheme in there, and it fits Kyler Murray. The questions that are raised is if he doesn't start, is he just going to go back to the major? Is he going to go back to MLB? Is he too short? One thing that I don't worry about is anybody being too short in the NFL because Baker Mayfield is 5'10", 5'11". Drew Brees is 5'10", 5'11". Russell Wilson's 5'10", 5'11". And they mastered the art of arm angles. That is the biggest key for a quarterback is getting the ball out of your hands at the correct arm angle. It's not a height thing. So if your only knock on him when I see these reports is the height, then you got to take him.
Exactly.
Because the height shouldn't scare you off from drafting him because the talent there's, the accuracy is there. He has nothing to do with Lamar Jackson. And I'm a Lamar Jackson fan. You're not going to see set from him if he were in a Bengals uniform. You wouldn't see set run plays for him unless he played for like maybe the Giants or somebody like that. He's prime that can move. And that's all it is. And he's way more accurate than Lamar Jackson ever was. But I think because he's mobile, it seems like you got to run read option with him. You got to no. Now, is he ready? I don't think so. Like there's a lot of passes I'm looking at right now. He struggles with passes on the outside hashes. Same thing with Daniel Jones. So it's like those are the 2 guys I think that'll still be there at number 11. But if you don't get a quarterback right there, you absolutely can't keep on going to free. I make the pick right there. He's going to be there. That's the guy that everybody's looking at. Kid, I think it's Mac from Alabama, Mac Wilson. A bunch of linebackers that are elite. And you can't wait on Vontaze Burfict anymore. You only got one linebacker, and that's Nick Vigil. So you can't wait on that anymore. If they go to tackle, like I said, I'll be really upset. If they try to sell y'all on tackle again or offensive alignment at that spot in this draft, it just doesn't make sense. And there's going to be some tackles out there that weren't. I highlighted some of them on my page. There's going to be some tackles that are out there the same way Cordy Glenn was out there, except they're restricted free agents that you can put in an offer sheet for. So if they sell us on they don't have the money or the budget, that's bull. Because this one paid way less than Cordy Glenn is getting paid. and they can absolutely start right away. And then we
Exactly.
hard is enough to put them in a backup position where your line is in shambles. So, just run to the podium for a tackle. And I think that those are the only three positions. Now, I will say this. There are 15 defensive linemen that are going to go in the first round. 15. That's it, right? If one of the guys that's in Williams or one of these guys really, really high falls to 11, yeah, you got to make that move too, because there's so many elite defensive tackles. Once it gets past the third round, it's not like that anymore. But in the first two rounds, it's going to tackles out there. And other than that, I just don't see them going anywhere else. I don't see a safety that could go in that spot. Talked about that earlier. Like, you got us back. You got to get two of those three. You got to get Tyler Eifert, Tyler Croft, or Uzomah picked, and then roll with Mason Strack as your third tight end.
Okay.
That's that. I mean, that is real simple for me on that aspect. It's like get the guy that represent the change, and that will be either the linebacker that's going to be your line, or it's going to be your quarterback that can new NFL. That's all it really is.
I totally agree, and you hit on one of the main things that I hate is just from analyzing the draft that I hate. That's one of my pet peeves is them just like ridiculing quarterbacks that are like 5'10" and 5'11". Like, it's one of the most overrated things in my opinion that I've ever seen. And if a guy is like 6'5" but threw 20 interceptions and was horrible, he's just supposed to be a top 5, top 10 quarterback. It's just ridiculous. We've seen that happen for years. But I think you hit it spot on. Like, if you get to that point and there's a guy on the board that we're comfortable with feeling that Zac Taylor can groom this guy to be a potentially elite quarterback like a Kyler Murray or the guy from Duke, then go ahead and take the chance on it. Some people are wondering, like, if they do choose to do that, or if they don't choose to do that, should we try to take the best player available and then next year try to go after a Tua or someone like that?
But the thing about next year is it's the same thing every year. You have to be a trash looking at any of those guys.
Right.
So these guys selling us on 20 draft for 2021,
right.
You need to go 4-12. And with this roster, I just don't see how they could even go 4-12. So people talking about Lawrence too and all these guys like that, you have to be a trash team. And you gotta win like 4 games. How can I schedule not win in 6-7 games? Same exact spot you were this year. Trying to trade up in your entire future just to get up to the top 3, top 5 spot. I don't even think that's another thing.
Exactly. And I think, like Zim saying, like Tua, first of all, Tua is not one of those guys that I think is going to go ahead and be. I think there's too much inconsistency there, so I'm not even gonna. I don't think he's gonna be that guy. But in order for this team to really go ahead and move in a direction that we want to go ahead and move, we have to address the leadership positions on this team. And number one is the field general, the quarterback. You have to go ahead and get some type of, I don't care if it's Haskins, I don't care if it's Murray, but a quarterback that is really going to go ahead and shake up, our depth chart, and who's really going to go ahead and maybe shape us for the future. Now, the only other positions that I really can see us taking for immediate needs, obviously linebacker, we need that. But I think an interesting one is cornerback, because I feel like if we could go ahead and get a corner, we have the ability to really shake up our money and how our contracts with Dre and stuff like that. If we go ahead and get a cornerback we really like, hey, we might be able to save a whole bunch of money, which is going to allow us to chase all kinds of options in the free agency. We're going to say, oh, we drafted, let's say we get Greedy Williams and he's getting all of our expectations, right? We have the ability then to say, wow, we have a cornerback. We no longer need to pay this man $50 million. Let's go ahead and use that for offensive line. Let's go ahead and use that for maybe a cheap wide receiver option if we don't keep Tate. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that could go, so that'll be interesting. But like Zim said as well, defensive linemen. and D tackles, man. If you have D linemen that are that elite and you have an opportunity to get one, depth in the defensive tackle position never hurt.
Right. I think so for me, that was actually one of my sleeper picks that I kind of talked about like way before I think even Jeff Hobson had put it on there. When you look at the run defense last year, it was horrible. And, although our linebackers were absolute garbage at times last year, a big part was not having that defensive tackle that could just clog the middle. And to me, like, if there's a guy like that, although I'm a huge Andrew Billings guy, he didn't, in my opinion, live up to expectations. If you have a guy there that you can sit there and will be a solid run stopper, you have to consider him. I was kind of big last year on the guy that ended up going to Tampa Bay.
Chris Baker? I'm
not Chris Baker. Not Chris Baker.
From Tampa Bay. Never mind.
Right. There was another guy that they ended up drafting. I think he came from Washington.
I know you're talking about Vita
Vea. Vita Vea. I really wanted Vita Vea last year. If you have a guy like that or of that mode, you have to consider him. Obviously, like you guys touched on, quarterback, but linebacker. If Devin White is there, which I honestly feel like the more and more we get into this draft stuff and the closer we get, I feel like we're gonna miss out on him. I feel like I start to get that same feeling that I had with guys like Derwin James, where it's like you get attached to these guys and then we're picking 11, but he goes 9th overall. Like Devin White has the ability to be a top 10 linebacker that's going to get picked. Like usually when you're one of those elite guys, if you're the best linebacker in the class, it could be close because him and Mac Wilson are both getting glowing grades. But if there's any sort of separation from them, he will be the guy that gets picked in the top 10, like a Roquan Smith last year. So that's what worries me about him. But I definitely am with Zim where I don't want a right tackle. Like I'd rather see them. This is just a speculation by me. But I looked at, some of the free agents that were coming out this year. And, when new coaches take over, sometimes they get players from some of their old teams. And one that stuck out to me was Jawan James, a free agent tackle for the Miami Dolphins, who was there when Zac Taylor was there. I'd rather pick up a guy like that and go and address either linebacker, quarterback, or any other position, defensive tackle in the draft, and corner too. I think you're spot on with that. I remembered I think it was the year that we grabbed William Jackson III. I was literally in my group chat fighting with guys saying that the Bengals are going to take another corner. And they were like, why? We have, 3 corners right now. We already have 3. We don't need a 4th. And I'm like, you have to look at the history of this team. Duke Tobin values picking those corners in the first round. It's almost like a religion for them to pick a corner in the first round. So you have to definitely keep an eye on a guy, like you said, Greedy Williams, or somebody that might be there that could be a position that they target. I'm not sure. Like, this is going to be the first year where it's really interesting to watch the draft because we have a new coach. So, we will really get to see whether it was like Duke Tobin having majority of the control with the pick. Was it a Marvin Lewis? Was it a combination of both? Was it, part of the coaching staff? I think that in the past that's played a big part in it. But I think going into the situation that they're coming off of with season ticket holders not renewing and things of that nature, they might want to do something that's going to be a splash. Like it might be a quarterback. It might be somebody like a Devin White that might be a big splash that will get the fan base excited. I think the only draft pick that you can guarantee that with, which I think people who know about Devin White will be, like diehard fans that watch the draft will be excited. But I think everybody would lose their minds if they ended up picking a quarterback. Now,
especially Haskins.
Man, like if
Haskins gets drafted, I think Cincinnati is going to just blow up with confetti because right. I mean, like I said, I'm in Colorado. I'm in Denver, man. So when I look at, I don't know a lot about Ohio State football, and I don't know a lot about the excitement that the local teams have there other than the Bengals. But if they pick Haskins, I can guarantee you that, man, those stands are going to be packed because it's a kid that they've seen play on multiple levels. And so that's going to be really crazy. And that, I mean, honestly, I'd like to see that happen. But I think they said Haskins might go to New York. But who knows, man? The draft has surprised so many people. Nobody knows until it's draft day. But I think you hit it right on the head. Is depending on which direction and who we draft, that's going to dictate the momentum of the fan base. That's going to dictate the, you know, the attitude of the players. I think that that's really going to go ahead and give football enthusiasts like you and myself an opportunity to really see where this team's head is at. And that's, are they going to try to go ahead and shoot for the win this year and win it all? Are they going to try to do the tank thing like what Gruden's doing in with the Raiders? What's going to happen with that? Who knows? Right. And so when we have a lot of those questions are going to be answered, and I'm excited for that.
Right. Well, Rob, I don't want to hold you and Zim up. I think we lost Zim, but I just want to thank you guys both for coming on here. If you aren't following these guys on IG, Zim's is at Zim_Hude and Rob's is at Rob_Bomber. That's BOMBER. Definitely be sure to follow these guys. Rob also has some pretty dope Bengals artwork. In my opinion, I think that you should start like selling some of that stuff because it's dope, bro. Like I would definitely buy some of that stuff and hang it up here in the background. But Rob is extremely talented guy. He's well-spoken, definitely knows his stuff. Caught my eye immediately and my ear immediately when I was listening to Zim. So appreciate having you on here, bro. And hopefully during the season and during the off season, we can have you on here more often. And I also heard that you're entertaining the idea of starting a podcast, right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
hey,
sir.
Man, keep pushing. This actually is funny because this actually started as a podcast, and I started getting more, in a sense, traction on YouTube than on there. So I just decided to convert this to a straight video podcast. But definitely, it's the wave of the future for sure.
Exactly, brother. Man, much love. Always appreciate coming on here and talking the Bengals with you, man. Definitely go ahead, and I'm gonna continue supporting all your endeavors and stuff. I'm about to go ahead and subscribe to you on YouTube. I never signed into my Gmail, so you about to get that subscriber right now, brother.
Appreciate it. All right, guys. Thanks for kicking it with us, Who Dey Nation. And as usual, I will leave you with a Who Dey all day, every day, and especially on Sunday.
Who Dey, man.